Alright guys, just continuing on from the last part, I'm going to unhide the inside pieces now and start to clean those up and then add a similar level of detail before finally going in and just making some final adjustments to the topology to keep things a bit cleaner. And if I get the opportunity, I'll just go in and make a couple more details on this bottom piece down here. Now this inside piece, you can see once again we've got another kind of vent shape happening here, and I want to include the same type of kind of a metallic inset there as we've got going, and just keep those similarities happening throughout the model. Just trying to tie everything together. So I'm going to make it a little bit thicker now by just pulling these pieces in. I'm going to hide this inside piece. I'm just trying to smooth everything out and keep it all the same kind of thickness and consistency. I'm going to add some hardness to this inside edge. Just going to slide that up like so and create another one of these kind of bevels. But before I do that, sometimes you can notice, you'll see as I do that, we're not getting the same type of kind of beveling that's present in the two side pieces here. So what I need to do to fix that is I need to go from side on, and just as usual I'm going from these really harsh angles and I'm just moving the vertices in and trying to fix the angle at which that bevel is actually happening. So you can see it comes out a little bit too far here, and by looking at the mesh from these extreme angles, it makes it much easier to determine where these pieces should sit in together. So you can see they're just not really lined up. So this is a good example of just seeing how at a low resolution like this, you've got a lot more control. Now if I were to try and make such massive adjustments to one of these pieces now, I'd struggle a lot more. So that's why you need to make sure that everything's polished before you go to that higher resolution. And really make sure that maybe not the details are necessarily polished, but just the overall, the base shape. So I'm going to delete these two edges again. And now I'm going to add one last bevel to this piece here. just to create a similar effect to what we're seeing here. And what I'm going to do actually is I can remove this inside piece. I'm going to go to view mode and I'm going to pull this in, and then this will serve as that bevel. Sometimes it's worth experimenting. So you can see here what I'm about to do is I'm selecting these two edges, and it might not necessarily work out, but I'm just pulling them up here and scaling them down just to see if I can create a little bit more of an interesting shape on the inside. But kind of straight away I can tell that unless I make some big adjustments in terms of how this inner shape looks, it's not really going to work out. So I'm just making some small adjustments here, trying to balance the thickness of this piece coming up. Then I might just go in and weld these pieces, just experimenting with kind of what's going to work. If that doesn't work, I can try pulling them up. Because I wasn't entirely happy with how this shape was slotting into the rest of the mesh. But I do like how it kind of comes out more than what I've got on this underside piece. So when I'm unsure of something, you can see I'm just kind of rotating around, looking at different angles, trying to get a feel for what I want to do with the mesh. So even though I'm not really happy with how that's going, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete that inside edge. Now I'm going to bring it into the center and just collapse it. Sorry. And now try and weld again. Just seeing what's working. So here I'm going to weld these two pieces now. And if it doesn't work out, just go in, select the geometry, and then happily just delete it. But I do think on this inside piece, I'm going to need to make some small adjustments. So I'm going to, some large adjustments. So I'm going to grab all of these vertices and scale them in, which is going to give me a much better opportunity to make sure that thickness that we've got going on here remains the same because that piece was too big before. All these little rotations and keeping things kind of sitting on their correct angle does make a big difference, because you can see if I rotate it like this, this polygon is smaller than this one, and that usually leads to kind of an imbalance in terms of the way the curve is flowing. But the one thing I'm not really happy with this mesh at the moment is one of the focal points is right in the center here, and before going in and adding any beveling, I'm just trying to think of an idea to get this shape looking a little bit more complex and possibly looking a little bit more detailed in terms of its basic structure, not going and adding paddling per se, but just getting the feel of the mesh right. So one thing I want to try is I want to try and get this. You can see we've got it going up to a point here, so I'm going to try and fix this bevel, get this sitting flush, and then I'll try one more time to sit the mesh, sit the bevel up here, flowing in nicely. So to do that, I'm going to have to slide up. As usual, I'm just trying to space these polygons a little bit nicer. You can see I'm just going in and making sure all of this stuff is just sitting in nice and flush. From above, I'm just making sure that all this topology's kind of as clean as it can be. So you can see here there's an opportunity where I can pull this out. So as you begin to clean things, the quality of the overall design begins to kind of sharpen as well. So it's directly related to how clean your mesh is. You can see by removing that vertice, it ends up just making things a little bit nicer to look at. One by one, I'm just pulling the vertices into shape, trying to get them sitting as roughly, like as rough as I can. Like once again, I'm just eyeballing this stuff, and I've never been one to sit there and try and get everything mathematical. I think it takes away a little bit from that concept-y feel to meshes. Now obviously if I was working in the film industry, I'd probably spend a bit more time making sure everything was perfectly clean, but for my own personal projects and trying to get across my design sense, I usually go as quick as possible. So you can see in here the spacing isn't perfect, you know, for example right here, but I'll usually leave that type of refinement right up until the end. So I'll go in and just make some really small adjustments to the meshes just to get everything sitting as close as I can. But that's only after I know the design's good, because I do change my mind a lot in terms of what I want to achieve while working on the mesh. The little adjustment I made there, you'll see what I'm about to do in a second. I'm basically trying to get a nice curve flowing in here so that I can create this more rounded shape for this piece to fit into. Now I'll move it from the side. You can see as I move it, the shape of this side begins to change. So I'm just looking for that nice middle ground. Once again, from the other side, just kind of trying to pull things in until they sit right. I'm just going to try something here. I'm going to make a connection on the inside and then just pull that in. And you can see that just enhances that shape. So now that I've made that adjustment to this kind of piece inside here, I can go in with this piece and just make a little bit more of a detailed kind of shape out of it. Before it was just a bit too round, and usually if you end up with something that's extremely round, it's better to leave it simplistic. It's very hard to go in and cut little details and shapes in. So I'm going to try and demonstrate on this piece how I can go in, and like I was doing here, just cutting in some shapes, I'll do that around an area here and just try and experiment with that. See how I can get that looking. So I can just quickly see here, just before I move on to this piece, that there's one little thing I want to add in, and you'll see as usual, I just don't really care so much for the topology. I'm just going to cut it in how I want to, and then deal with the result afterwards. So I'm connecting a line down here. I'm just going to quickly clean that up. I'm going to go in and add a support edge loop. And get rid of this. And see how that goes. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this edge, and from view mode I'm just going to pull that in to create a shape this way. You can see what I'm trying to achieve here. And I'm just pulling this down to create more roundness. So you make the point I've made here is you make the design cut first, then you work around that. You build the topology around the way you want your mesh to look. Don't look at your topology and think, oh, I can't do that because the loops aren't flowing correctly or it's a little bit of hard work. You've kind of got to get used to the idea that topology is the simple part, and figuring out which cuts to make and which edges to push in, that's the hard part of the creation process. But once you do it, adding in some hardness to things just makes things a little bit more polished, and it becomes kind of progressively easier as you're going along. So adding that cut there, it smooths out nicely. We've got a really wonky kind of 5-sided, 6-sided polygon here, but it's all flowing nicely and you don't really have to worry about little problems. So what I can do now is I'm going to go in and make a connect along here, for the sole purpose of being able to go in and delete this shape. And this is where I'm just going to go and make a bevel like so. Now I can chamfer this and connect these up here. And now I've just added a little bit more detail in that area. It'll give me an opportunity to go in later and add some detail from this vent system. Maybe get you can see we've got this metal ridge running along here. Maybe now that can slot into that piece and it's not so separate. So now I'm finally actually going to get onto this piece and just start playing with getting some detail out of it. So I've got two options here in terms of where I want to add a curve. I can do something a bit more fancy and kind of go up here like so. and maybe try and create a little... It gets tricky. But I think that's going to work. I think what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to make this, because this piece is too big, we've got a lot of kind of small details here. I still want this to be one large piece, and I might actually go in and add a nice shape to this. I don't like how this is looking also, so I'm going to get rid of that. But I might go in and add a little kind of swirly curve in here. I just like to do that stuff, just give it my own kind of twist on things. But you'll see what I'm about to do here. So I'm going to connect another edge up. Push it in here. As usual, I'm not worrying about the topology at this stage. I'm just trying to get the cut where I want it to be. Okay, now I can select this edge and pull this in. So I'm just, as usual, just cleaning things up here, trying to get the roundness right and the overall volume of this shape right. Now you can start to see the way that cut's working, and the cut also, you kind of get where I'm coming from, blends into this piece here. Still quite messy though. I'm going to select this bottom edge and I'm going to extrude it. Just so it looks like the piece is actually rounded underneath there and has a place to slot in. So you can see we don't have that on this bit also, so it's probably a good time now to do that on this bit. So I'm selecting that edge. I'm just going to do another one of those extrudes. So to pronounce this edge, I'm just going to grab it from the side. You can see it's just kind of, it's not inset enough. So to pull that in is just going to enhance the sharpness of that point. And it also gives me an opportunity to pull out these other points and get a bit of roundness happening this way. So once I'm done kind of roughly blocking out a shape, you can see now everything's starting to look a bit clean and tidy. I'll just go over and just start rotating over the mesh. Usually I do it quickly because over time I've kind of adapted to seeing things in real time. But when you start out, really go slowly over the mesh and just take a look at everything and try and focus on little highlights and things like that. So to you guys, you might not see that there's a problem here, but what I notice is that I can see the gap between the polygons is a bit inaccurate here and it's not really flowing in correctly. So that's where I'll go in from this view, take a closer look at what's going on. And I think I'll just rather this fade out and actually not be so hard. So now I can pull this up from underneath. You can see that this underside is a little bit buggy. And I'm just looking for little problems like that. I can pull this a bit closer. See, little things like that, they're just popping up and it shouldn't be. So I'm just thinking of the potential here. I don't like how this is perfectly flat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect an edge loop down the center there. I always like to unselect the last couple or even just the last few. And now I'm going to pull this out a bit. So now what's going to happen is you'll see from before when I rotate over this, it gives it a little bit more roundness. And the highlights are going to pick up a bit nicer. Just little details like that that you always should be paying attention to. And you should, over time, you begin to stop seeing the topology on the mesh and you begin to just start focusing on the highlights. And that's when your meshes are going to really have that nice cleanliness to it. And when you render things with that grayscale look that I've done on some of my own personal projects, things look pretty cool. Like they look handcrafted. So I've added in some shapes here that give it some more subtle detail. Now I'm going to do the same on this piece. So I can connect along here, unselect the last one. I'm just going to go from view mode. I'm just going to pull it in like so. Now if it's not 100%, just modify things until they're fitting. And when I mean fitting, I mean like rounded correctly. And there you go. Very quickly you start to add some details to the mesh. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to select this edge. Actually, I'm going to select the higher edge. I'm going to create a selection from it. So I don't know if I've showed you this yet in the course, but I've selected the edge loop. Now I can click create shape from selection. And what that gives me is a little spline. Now if I enable that spline and give it thickness, what I can do is I can collapse the mesh and just select one of the edge loops. Convert it to a poly. And now I've got a polygon selection kind of in the center where I need it to be. So I'm just going to go in, select those two. Right, now I can collapse the symmetry on this and grab the border and just scale that in. just shrinking these inside bits in. So I'm going to try and add, like usual, one of those little insets. So I'm connecting along here. 2 connections. Just like so. So you'd be really surprised how well a 5 or 6 sided polygon can smooth in, as long as you understand the way the topology works. So you can see what I did there is when I move that edge in, I've left this top one the same. So I can actually go in if I want this to be a little bit cleaner and just connect this. And you can see it smooths in really nicely. And we've got a 5 sided polygon here and another 5 sided polygon. Can even go in and connect it like so to give it some hardness, but then we've got the issue of this polygon not smoothing out that well, and you need to continue the geometry out. I personally feel it looks just a bit better like that. Alright, we're going to add one more inset. See this inset in here? I'm going to do a similar thing on this piece. So I'm going to actually make a connection along here. And the edges I'm focusing on are the ones that I'm actually going to rotate. So I can just do that connection, delete the ones I don't want. Now with edge constraint turned on, I can just rotate these into position. Like so. It's just another type of detail that I can add in. We've got something wonky going on here, so I'm just going to take a look at this. So actually this is a good thing that's happened here. It gives me the opportunity. You can see where this piece is connected. I'll actually go in and fix that now, but then I'm going to do the same for this piece, and this will just be its own separate piece. And I think what that means is I can get rid of this piece. And that actually does look a bit better, as long as this goes into a point. So sometimes the detail comes to you. You can sit there all you want and try and figure out the best ways for things to happen, but just by chance, this topology just ended up terminating there, and it gave me an idea to go in and make sure that that is actually the point of termination. So what I'm going to do here is to make this kind of edge selection, I'm going to duplicate all these meshes and I'm going to go hide unselected. And I make sure to duplicate those as a copy, not as an instance, because you don't want to turn off these features and then go in and have that effect on the mesh you just had. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to attach all three of these meshes. I'm just going to get the selection there. Now I can just create a shape from that selection and delete this polygon. Alright, now I can unhide, and if I convert this to an editable poly, I can select this loop. Just going to target weld these together. Just very quickly deleting the points that just make no sense. Just going to unhide this piece and add some thickness to this last little edge here. Alright guys, I'm going to wrap up the lesson at this point because there are a lot of other topics I want to get through in the course, and I feel like I've done a pretty good job of showing you how, as you get closer to that finishing product and that finishing model, things become that last little bit of polish gives you that final kind of quality. Now you could go in here and fix up the topology. For example, by going in here, what you might be able to do is I can connect some loops and then just connect these up. Just basic cleaning stuff like this. And all I'm trying to do here is just minimize the amount of wobbling in the surface. Now, it's not essential to go in and do this. For personal projects, I wouldn't worry so much, but you can definitely go in and spend that last little bit of time trying to, terminate edge loops. But the point of this is I wanted to make sure that you knew that things don't really have that final quality like in my portfolio right up into the last little bit of detail that you add. It's kind of it all comes down. You can see for the first 6 hours of this recording, it didn't really look like much. There wasn't, you couldn't see any of these cool little features, and it was just more about blocking the overall shape. And that's where that design theory comes into play. Being able to patiently wait until you're happy, until you've moved things around enough so that you know exactly where you could have taken the mesh and seen how it can go wrong. And I mean, it's just a trial and error process. Now, obviously, if you're working from concept images, it'd be much faster. But the whole point of this workflow is that you're designing in real time from your head, and you're trying to be as creative as possible. I never really enjoyed the process of having an exact reference image up and then just constantly, flicking back and forth, trying to make everything perfect. I found a lot more enjoyment through just spending a little bit more time and creating something that was truly unique to myself and the style I was trying to push through. Alright, thanks heaps guys. I hope you enjoyed these lessons. The next one is going to be on a totally different topic, and I'll update you guys on that in as soon as possible. But in the meantime, I'm going to be trying to get out the next Mastering V-Ray lesson. But I will have another hard surface lesson out before the finale of Mastering V-Ray. So at the moment, I feel like I'm slightly ahead on the hard surface course, just due to the fact that these last 3 lessons were all 3 hours long. So there's been quite a lot of content put out. But also, please remember that even if there are some delays in getting new lessons out, there is going to be 18 to 20 lessons on this course. So we're only about halfway at the moment. Alright, thanks heaps guys. See you next time.